Hello and welcome to a discussion of one of NYCHA's most important initiatives, A Blueprint for Change. It's a set of ideas that we have been preparing over the past year to begin to think about how we could raise the capital that NYCHA needs to invest in its apartments, its in buildings, and make life better for the families who live at our properties. This is a set of ideas. It includes a number of initiatives and efforts, some at the state level and some at the federal level. And we want to run through these ideas with you today so that you have a chance to understand why we structured the blueprint the way we did and what it's trying to do. And we hope, after you hear this, you'll understand that this is an approach that could work for NYCHA. This is an approach that could lead to the additional capital dollars we need to make investment in our units. The blueprint is actually part of a series of efforts that NYCHA is undertaking today in order to both address the capital issue, but also reform the organization. NYCHA is required by the agreement that we signed in January 2019 with the Southern District, HUD, and the city to complete a comprehensive reorganization. This is a reorganization from the top down and from the bottom up, which means that we have to focus on the properties, we have to look at the structures that we currently have in place and how those could be changed to make property management stronger and better and more responsive. We also have to look at how the agency is doing certain critical business processes, such as annual research or work orders, or even where the skilled trades might be in their location citywide to speed up their response to do work orders. This reorganization is undergoing now, and there'll be more about this coming in the fall, but it is a significant effort. It is transformative and goes by the transformation plan. So the transformation plan is the structure of NYCHA and how it will be reformed. What we're going to talk about today is our capital plan, stabilization. Stabilization meaning we're putting enough money into this deep repair so that units are livable and habitable and of high quality. We'll talk about that today. If we're successful in raising the capital money to do the stabilization, there's another strategy that we want to unfold, and that is jobs and economic recovery. If we're able to raise this kind of capital, billions of dollars, we have to look at how we do jobs and how we provide opportunities to families and individuals who live in our properties to take advantage of that capital in the best way. That is, the capital's there to do construction, but it can also lead to other paths for economic development and economic opportunity for our families. So the three could work together. The restructuring of NYCHA to provide better service and deal with our issues and structures that have to be revised. The stabilization plan, which is investment in the apartments and the buildings. And if we get that investment, can we also make an investment in our families and in our households that would benefit them beyond just fixing their sink or fixing their bathroom. NYCHA's current state. So it's an extremely large portfolio of housing. I think everyone who's watching this already understands that, but 175,000 units. Overall, across all 175,000 units, NYCHA's capital needs are around $40 billion. Right now, NYCHA, through PACT and RAD, is looking to address somewhere in the vicinity of 62,000 units with some combination of those programs. Those programs are essential, and we're not going to abandon PACT or RAD. In fact, it's critical that they continue to move forward because the blueprint ideas on their own cannot raise enough money to close the capital gap that NYCHA currently has. And when we combine both the RAD and PACT sites plus the potential for the blueprint, we finally get to a number that can address the whole portfolio and the whole need. So RAD and PACT will continue. The blueprint is intended to address the 110,000 units not identified as part of RAD and PACT, and to provide an umbrella that covers those units, and by covering those units, covers the entire NYCHA portfolio. And we started by thinking about what is the work that we would have to do, and that work is actually spelled out for us in the HUD agreement we signed in January of 2019. That work is important. It includes mold and lead and elevators and heat and pests and waste management. Those are all areas that are called out in our agreement with HUD, and those are all areas that we have to address and do so with speedily and quickly. When we come at this construction, because there's so much construction that we're going to have to do, we want to treat the construction comprehensively. That is, do as much work in the building as we can and treat the entire property, the buildings in the property, in a comprehensive fashion. So what is the kind of work we envision under the blueprint? This falls into defined categories. These categories align with what's in the HUD agreement. These are the compliance areas that NYCHA has been struggling with over the past few years, and it's the reason that the monitor was put in place to help NYCHA achieve compliance in some of these areas. The first area that we're going to attack is mold. And if we're going to do mold, we've got to do piping. That's the supply, hot and cold supply lines in the walls, and the waste pipes that remove the wastewater and take it out to the street and eventually into the sewerage system. So those pipes we're estimating would cost around $9.5 billion because we're also including kitchen and bath improvements. If we have the walls open and we're doing the piping, we might as well also do the kitchen and baths. In addition, we want to do the ventilation in the bathrooms and make sure that that ventilation is functioning, fully functioning and of a higher quality. The second area that we're going to look at is lead abatement. And this means taking the lead out of the unit, that there's not going to be any lead left in the unit. We've started a whole process of XRF testing to identify units and where the lead exists in that unit, identify those components, and we want to use that information to target our abatement efforts and remove the lead completely from the 110,000 units that would be part of the blueprint. We also want to do heat and elevators. And heat is especially important because we need to make a dramatic change in the way that we provide heat and provide hot water to our buildings. We're going to decouple from our centralized boilers. We're going to go to building-based systems. Each building is going to have its own small boiler plant. That means new boiler technologies that are more efficient and means that when the buildings are not connected with the distribution system, if we have a distribution leak, it's not going to bother us anymore. We're not going to have a distribution system. We'll have a boiler for each building, and each building will be able to stand on its own with boilers that are backup boilers, so if one goes down, we don't have a situation where we are immediately without heat or hot water. The last area that we're going to address is safety and quality. We want to look at all the door entrance ways at the buildings and whether they can be redone with new types of doors and entry controls. We also want to look at refurbishing and restoring the intercoms or similar systems so that folks can see who's coming to the door and let people in an appropriate way. And we also want to address security with more cameras and lighting around the front door and side door entrances. So those are some significant improvements that we think would help with quality of life at the building. And lastly, where we have buildings that have gas for cooking, we want to redo the gas lines in those buildings, as that's been a constant problem for us. When we have a gas leak of any kind, the pipes are so old that we wind up repiping the buildings anyway before we can take care of the leak that may just be confined to one place in the building or one apartment. This is the stabilization plan. Attack the compliance issues, attack them completely, systemically, and do deep repair necessary to make sure that the units address these critical needs. If we're able to raise additional funds, NYCHA is prepared to expand its scope. And that would include taking on some of the community center work that we need to do, looking at the grounds, and even the building cladding if we have the opportunity. It's going to depend on how much capital we think we can raise. You'll see what we anticipate as the capital gaps that we're working with. On the stabilization side of this slide, you see we're a gap around $11 billion, and on the more advanced scope of work, that gap is around $18 billion. So those are the numbers that we're kind of shooting for. $11 billion to get into the units, do this massive amount of construction, and get those units in a place where they're safe and high quality. And if we raise more money, not only do the work in the unit, but the other work I described to you just a few minutes ago. How is it possible to try and raise this much money? Well, I mentioned earlier, right at the start, that the blueprint was designed to satisfy a number of demands that currently exist in federal legislation and in the way HUD operates the programs that Congress has given it appropriations for. The blueprint was constructed to try and meet those needs and take advantage of the opportunity to provide additional subsidy that's buried in those in the federal legislation and in the federal regulations. So we do this previewing how this could work. The first thing we're proposing is the creation of the New York City Housing Preservation Trust. And why would we do this? It's important because for NYCHA to have any hope of accessing additional subsidy, we actually have to transfer the program. We have to transfer from Section 9 to Section 8. That transfer triggers certain eligibility for a tenant protection voucher. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. But if we're going to transfer NYCHA property, we have to make sure it is secure in perpetuity, and it's designed to serve low-income families in perpetuity. So we're proposing to create a public benefit corporation called the Preservation Trust. The trust would receive the units under a ground lease from NYCHA, thus affecting the transfer that's critical to NYCHA's families becoming eligible for tenant protection vouchers. In addition, when we started to look around at different models, we looked at the School Construction Authority. The School Construction Authority works with the Department of Education in a partnership. The School Construction Authority does major school rehabs, builds the new schools, and then works with DOE to turn those schools back over to the Department of Education after construction is completed. The School Construction Authority has certain procurement advantages because it was designed and set up to do large level construction efficiently. We borrowed some of the ideas from the School Construction Authority model and we put them into the Preservation Trust. The trust, again, is a public benefit corporation that has a specific meaning under state law. It's not a private corporation. It's a public corporation intended to work on this mission alone. So we'd set up the trust, and NYCHA would transfer the units to the trust under a ground lease. The trust would do the construction and the financing and contract back to NYCHA for the everyday maintenance and operations of the properties. This is important. Remember earlier in the presentation, we talked about doing the reorganization. This is the reorganized NYCHA that the trust would be working with, the stronger NYCHA that's giving better property management services and better services in general. If we can stand up the trust and get the trust moving, it's going to require that we go to Albany and get state legislation for this. Then the second part of the plan comes into play, that we approach HUD with what's called a Section 18 disposition. This is the actual transfer of the property. We think we meet the transfer requirements that HUD has laid out, and if approved and the property is transferred from NYCHA to the trust, then every family in occupancy on the date of that transfer becomes eligible for tenant protection vouchers. It's NYCHA's plan to take those vouchers and, to the extent that HUD will allow us, pool those vouchers together so that we have an account, a reserve, whatever term you want to apply, a pot of funds, pot of money that we can then go out and borrow and leverage. The pooling of the funds is important. It'll give us more chance to borrow funds on the private market. The second thing we're going to need to do, in addition to talking to HUD about both the transfer and the funding mechanism, is we're going to need more tenant protection vouchers nationally. This means we have to go to our congressional delegation, to the federal appropriators, and work with the other industry groups who are concerned about public housing and Section 8 programs and see if we can secure more appropriations in future budgets, including more appropriations for tenant protection vouchers. If we're successful with 1 and 2, if we can actually get the trust going and begin to get our applications into HUD, then we will be successful in meeting the demands of the properties with respect to stabilization and potentially economic recovery, depending on how much money we raise. So it's very important. The trust, the opportunity for tenant protection vouchers, and the opportunity then to provide the stabilization and investment so desperately needed. Why would we pursue these tenant protection vouchers? This is pretty straightforward. There's no magic here. On the slide in front of you are 2 bars. The bar on the left side, the shorter one, is the amount of money that a typical NYCHA unit takes in. It's the amount of money per month that that unit actually raises. The blue is rent. So tenant rent, very important part of the formula and very important part to NYCHA's whole financial system. The orange is the capital funds that the unit is entitled to, and the gray is the operating subsidy that we receive for management and maintenance on a day-to-day basis. Combined, those two add up to $1,250. That same unit, if it was migrated into a tenant protection voucher, where the voucher is attached to the unit, it would be project-based so that it's attached to the unit, that voucher is worth $650 per unit per month more, $1,900. It's an extraordinary jump in subsidy. And it means that inside of that subsidy profile, NYCHA would have the ability to borrow funds. The example on the page shows how much money we could borrow with 25,000 tenant protection vouchers. $3.4 billion. For context, the amount of money we're receiving nationally as part of the HUD appropriations process for capital is around $500 million. So this is 6 times what we could raise over and above the capital we get in any given year from Congress. So this additional subsidy could be used to make the kinds of investments in the unit that we've too long deferred. It shows what we anticipate with the extra subsidy, what we could borrow or what we could bond. We're estimating about $6 of leverage dollar for every dollar of subsidy. So that would either be a loan in the traditional sense, a line of credit, could be a bond issue, or a combination of all three. But we think that that 6-to-1 number is a solid number and shows that if we had the additional subsidy, we could do the significant borrowing that NYCHA needs. And this gets us to thinking about the process we have to go through to tap into this additional subsidy. And again, how do we protect our units and protect our families and make the blueprint work so that these units are preserved and kept for low-income families, both the families we house today and the families we're going to house in the future. The trust, as I mentioned earlier, is a public benefit corporation. That's important. It's a corporation chartered by the state through a state legislative process designed for one mission. In this case, the mission is to support the capital reinvestment in NYCHA's property. The trust is created, and how does it work? We borrowed the procurement process from the School Construction Authority. NYCHA transfers under a ground lease the land and units to the trust. Now this is important to remember. NYCHA is staying put. NYCHA is not going anywhere. The Housing Authority is still there, and the trust is affiliated, an instrument of NYCHA to help advance the capital financing that I talked about and advance the construction management. So even though the trust is at the other end of the lease, NYCHA still is there as the ultimate owner of this property. And in many ways, the trust and NYCHA both have to agree before something could happen. It's not possible that the trust could go out on its own and make decisions about the property without NYCHA's concurrence. So there's kind of a check and balance built into this relationship. So the ground lease transfers the property. The trust would oversee the construction management, and this is significantly large contracts. These are contracts to do work in 12,000 units, for example. Remember the $3.4 billion from the other page. This would be an extraordinary amount of construction, and the trust would be designed to help facilitate the procurement of the firms and advance the construction management of the whole construction process. In addition, the trust then contracts back to NYCHA, the reorganized NYCHA, for daily management and maintenance services, and the NYCHA staff would continue to be providing services both to the properties and to the trust and support the trust's efforts. If we're able to do this, the result is that we have end-to-end public control on the site, as the trust and NYCHA are the entities that are going to be holding these properties secure and safe. We would be able to attack the compliance issues I mentioned earlier, the mold and the lead, for example, as well as the heat. If we have to go to the state for legislation to set up the trust, we're also thinking we can embed the resident rights and protections that are so essential to our families now, embed them in the way the trust operates. So the state law will include the kind of specific resident rights, many of which you might be familiar with as they exist already in the RAD program. But we're carrying over rights from the public housing program to make sure that the trust and the housing that it holds operates with the administrative protections and safeguards and the administrative opportunities, like the resident right to organize, like a right to grievance, Section 3, things that we are familiar with in public housing that we believe should be carried over into the new system. If we're successful with this model, we can also have significant impacts in a number of other areas, and one of those is energy, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And lastly, we retain the NYCHA workforce and continue to use a public workforce to administer properties on a day-to-day basis and to support the trust overall in its mission as it works to help NYCHA. NYCHA is going to have to make some reductions in operating costs, and we think those reductions can come in three ways. First, by replacing outmoded systems or old boilers or old piping, we think we're going to cut down on the number of emergency work tickets and the number of work tickets people call in generally, since a lot of these are, for example, mold is particularly difficult. If we don't replace the pipe behind the wall, we can do all the work we want in the bathroom or kitchen, but odds are eventually that mold's going to come back. So we think we'll see a reduction in work tickets. I mentioned the heating plants earlier and the energy. Right now, NYCHA loses a tremendous amount of efficiency right up the flue, right up the chimney. 20% of our efficiency is lost just there. Pumping the steam or hot water to other buildings from the centralized boilers, these are large centralized boiler plants, pumping that steam or hot water costs us another 30% loss in efficiency. If we can go to building-based systems, it's going to be possible for us to have high efficiency boilers, save money, and as you'll see in a minute, our proposal is to take that savings and plow it right back into the buildings. The last area that we think we'll be able to show some savings is as NYCHA reorganizes and becomes more efficient and is able to deliver services better, we would be able to achieve some savings in our day-to-day operations because we're organized better and organized smarter. Last area that NYCHA believes it can save money is through our reorganization. We think we can streamline operations, some of the business processes that have been difficult for residents, and doing so, we wind up with a more efficient operation and one that conceivably costs us less, and we could pick up some savings that way. So those three areas, work tickets, as we replace old and outdated equipment and old and outdated piping, for example, energy savings, and then, of course, savings in operations. I've mentioned the organizational plan a number of times, and it's important that we think about this as working in conjunction with the capital plan, the preservation, the blueprint. These two things are actually working together. So our goal is to have an organization that is property focused, that you can see clearly what's happening at the property, that the resources that belong to the property, say through property-based budgeting, are available to the manager and to residents who want to find out what's going on with the money that's been appropriated to run the property. And we also want to change our business processes. We want to look at things like the alternative work schedule for the caretakers. We want to look at annual research. We want to look at how work order tickets are called in and how the response is tracked and measured. Things that residents have complained to us about, we want to attack as part of the reorganization. So the reorganization works together with the preservation, the blueprint plan, to strengthen NYCHA's buildings and to strengthen NYCHA as a management organization. I mentioned the impact earlier from energy, and in fact we think if we get the capital money that we're talking about, there are going to be four big areas of impact: energy, jobs, health, and economic recovery. The slide that's in front of you now shows what we think is going to happen as we begin to replace outmoded boilers and hot water systems. Somewhere in the late second or third year, we would begin to see energy savings. We can harvest those savings and finance other improvements either improvements related to more energy work to make the buildings even more efficient, or general improvements to make the buildings more livable. So we think that this investment now in replacing outmoded heating and hot water systems will pay dividends for years to come, not only through better service, but by costing us less and allowing us to do more work. So what about jobs? There are three big impacts that we could see. If you recall, when we started talking, we had a jobs and recovery strategy. If we're successful in raising even only a portion of the funds that we're talking about, but if we're successful in raising money at this level, there's three big areas that we could impact. First, the near-term construction jobs. We would want to understand and drive forward with our union partners that we're looking to expand the opportunities for families and individuals to access those jobs. So the construction jobs could be an important source of both employment and training as we try to get new folks into those jobs. The second area is one that might come about because NYCHA's simply going to be buying so much stuff. We're going to have to buy new boiler systems. We're going to have to buy new piping, new intercoms, new doors. And the question comes up, if we buy at scale, and we would be at significant scale, is it possible to assemble or manufacture some of these goods right here in New York City? Could that be done? It's called supply chain. And if we could convince a manufacturer to come here, we could create supply chain jobs, assembly jobs, or packaging, or other kinds of work that relate to making sure that whatever material NYCHA is buying is assembled and manufactured here and shipped to us, but the assembly and manufacturing could also be done with NYCHA residents or other Section 3 eligible individuals. The last area that there's tremendous opportunity in is expanding the economic horizon for our families and for MBE, WBE firms to look at what the future holds. If we're changing the boiler systems, they're going to need maintenance. If we upgrade the elevators, that's going to be a different kind of control system. If we're talking about changing the intercoms and electrical systems and other parts of the building, someone's going to need to know how to repair them. So we think there's tremendous opportunity long-term, both for our residents and others, to gain new skills and gain new opportunities because of the changes we're making in NYCHA buildings. So I mentioned health and I mentioned recovery. And what we're thinking about on the health side is, since we're doing so much work in the building, could we find a health partner that would work with us to create health space, maybe a mini clinic or something in a building? And if not that, what health services could be delivered? We want to try and get health services or places where people can go to get advice or counsel or assistance on health at the property level. So we would be looking for a partner to help us do that, and do that so that the properties are better served and the healthcare information and healthcare system is available to our families more readily. The other area that's important, I've talked about this, is the recovery. Given the scale and the time we're in the impact on the economy of COVID is significant. We went back and looked at what happened the last time public housing received a large amount of capital. Under President Obama, under the stimulus bill that was passed when he was president, about $8 billion in funding was released to public housing authorities all over the country. When that was analyzed for economic impact, it was found that for every dollar that a housing authority spent, there were $2.12 in what's called regional economic impacts. These are secondary impacts beyond, say, the impact of someone getting a job. What do we mean by this? This is the construction company buying new computers or buying new tablets for its workforce. It's a worker buying new protective gear. It's a gentleman or someone who runs the vendor cart coming to the site and selling sandwiches or drinks. It's all of that taken into account, and for the dollar of capital that we invest, $2.12 of this kind of activity impacts the rest of the economy in a very, very strong way. So health and recovery, jobs and energy, four big areas where if we can raise this money, we could have significant impact, not just for NYCHA buildings, but on the city as a whole. What is ahead for us? Well, one of the things we've been doing is trying to communicate these ideas in as broad a fashion as we can. We've held dozens and dozens of meetings, and we're holding them in all manner of ways. We've worked to brief tenant association presidents and leadership one-on-one. We've also done group meetings with our tenant associations and the leadership. We've done town halls where residents can call in, hear the presentation, and ask questions after. We've briefed HUD in the Southern District, and we've briefed the Federal Monitor. We've briefed advocacy organizations, both those that are based in New York and other national advocacy organizations that are based in Washington. And we've been briefing our elected officials. We've talked at length with our congressional delegation and either briefed the congressperson directly or we've briefed their staff so that they're aware that the blueprint is coming around and we're trying to launch some of these ideas for the benefit of NYCHA's residents. What is coming up for us is a series of real steps that we're going to have to take to make the blueprint an actual working approach to our capital issue. The first is that we need to have partners like you and others. If you like how these ideas sound, we think that they can work. We think they can protect the families. We think we can make sure that we have the best of the carryover rights from public housing, and we think we can change the subsidy platform to yield more funding. We would need your help. We would need your support because we have to go to Albany, for example, and get the trust legislation passed. That means the state assembly, the Senate, and the governor have to sign off on this. And we're hopeful that we might have a chance to convince the state that creating the Public Benefit Corporation, the NYCHA Preservation Trust, is a good idea and could work. The last area that we're going to need support and help in is two parts. One, discussions with HUD on the financing of this, the things I discussed with you earlier about pooling the funds, how the funds are released, using the vouchers in this way for leverage. This is a conversation we have to have with the department. To their credit, I want to say that we are in informal conversations with HUD so far, and those have been going pretty well. And the second area is we've got to go back to Congress and get more appropriations dollars put into the tenant protection vouchers. Nationally, there's not enough tenant protection vouchers to satisfy the demand that New York would be making. And that demand is not only for us, but there are many, many other housing authorities out there that could benefit from using these vouchers as well. So I want to thank you for listening to the blueprint. These are our ideas shaped by the legislative, the statutory requirements that we have to go through. But we think the plan would provide secure and affordable housing for many generations to come if we can make this capital investment now. So if you like what you hear or you have questions, give us a shout out. We'd be glad to answer. And we look forward to cooperation that will bring us closer and closer to units that are in great condition for our families. Thank you so much for listening.